this episode on my YouTube channel, which is focused on CodeCatalyst and custom blueprints again. In the last episode, we looked at use cases for custom blueprints together with Torsten and the DevTools hero. And today I'm very excited because I have Alex with me. Alex, hey, great to have you.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you so much for having me on your show and on your YouTube channel. Really excited.
It's a pleasure for me to have you here. But who are you? No one will know you, most probably.
So my name is Alex. I'm a senior software engineer with Amazon CodeCatalyst. Specifically, I'm responsible for CodeCatalyst Blueprints. So we are very excited about CodeCatalyst Blueprints. I'm based out of New York here, and feel free to, ping me. Don't have most of the social medias. I think I have LinkedIn. You can ping me there. But I am very excited to talk about why we think blueprints are sort of the next feature are the future in how we develop software, and how these blueprints represent sort of fundamental change in the way that software engineers think about both building their code, but critically also maintaining that code at scale. And I'll get into some of that, I think, as part of the show.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to have you on because I've been kind of going on your nerves for the last few weeks since we met in Las Vegas with a lot of challenging, hopefully, and difficult questions. And I think that today is a good chance to talk a little bit about also how long have you been working on custom blueprints? Has it been like 2 weeks or is it more like 5 years?
So I've been working on custom blueprints. So I actually started the initiative internally at Amazon. And the way this works internally at Amazon is you write what's called a PRFAQ, which is a document that talks about, it's a PR, which is a press release, and frequently asked questions, FAQ. So you end up writing sort of a document that you pitch internally. So I was actually the one who wrote that, and been sort of driving that initiative internally at Amazon. I think we're coming up on about 2 years now. I've been very fortunate in that we've got some really, really talented engineers sort of bought in and working on this, as well as some of the key principals who've been behind projects like ProGen, CDK, a few others. So we've been working. Yeah, it's been about 2 years so far at Amazon. We launched the initial iteration of Blueprints about a little more than a year ago at reInvent, and I think about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago now, it was about 2 weeks before reInvent, whatever that is. We launched Lifecycle management, which was sort of always the vision, and sort of the whole point of why we want to build custom blueprints. It's been a wild ride. It's been a lot of fun, though.
Can imagine, right? It's a lot of work as well, as I can think of, and as I explore more and more what custom blueprints are there to help you with, I think that there's a lot of potential in making this a real important thing as we move towards a more cloud native way of developing software as well. So if you can speak a little bit about what were the first few use cases where you saw custom blueprints being used internally, is that something that you can share a little bit with us?
Yeah, so I'll see what I can do there. So before I dive too deep into that, let's just give like a really quick overview of what custom blueprints are and why we talk about blueprints and why that matters. There is still a big drive to do infrastructure as code, right? So all the things that go inside your AWS account or Google or Azure or whatever, right? Instead of having to click through the console and adding a new database or whatever, if you define all that through code, right, and you can generate all that, things become much more scalable, much more reproducible. Turns out you have a very similar problem with code bases themselves, right? So if you think about, I have code base A, code base B, code base C, right? And they all might do sort of similar things, right? This might be a web app that, I don't know, sells bananas. This might be a web app that, I don't know, does something else, right? This might be another web API. It turns out like you have pretty much the exact same problem where you want them to all sort of look the same. You want to be able to like change them together. But you don't want to change all of them, right? You want to be able to change some of the configurational parts of it, right? You might not want to change what's in the database, but you want to change the definition of the database at scale. So it's the same in every region, whatever, right? So to that end, we kind of need a solution to think about code bases themselves as code. And that's really what blueprints are. For like slightly less technical people, really what they are is, today you can use a template to get started with some code. But that kind of breaks down, right? You can find your best practices in your template and you get started. But what happens next, right? Like that's the key problem with templates, and why there's lots of tools out there. They're great, right? Like Yeoman, things like that. But they always sort of fall flat on the what's next, right?
But
when you have a new
so
best
I've
practice.
I've never been a Progen user, Alex. So for the last 15 years of my life, I've been very good at copy pasting an existing code base and then kind of iterating on top of that.
Exactly.
Why do custom blueprints change that from your perspective?
Well, with custom blueprints, what you can do is you can define your best practices however you want to do it, just in one place. Like you said, you today copy paste, maybe you put it in a template, right? Blueprints are that template, right? You use that template to get started with a project, but then when you update that template, crucially what happens is every single project that has been created from that blueprint also gets an update, in a very smart way, in a way that's fully customizable. But let's just say you used a blueprint to create a new web app. And now I do something like I update the TS config, right? That'll allow me to propagate that update everywhere. And it's not just for the TS config, right? It can be for like the security portion. It can be for XYZ. What's also really interesting is today, some tools allow you to use multiple templates together. Blueprints are sort of the same way, right? Where you can have blueprints just define small portions of your application. And this is actually why we called it blueprints back in the day. We called it blueprints because we think about blueprints as architectural constructs of the code itself, right? And much like you're building a house, right? Your house has blueprints, right? You might have blueprints for like just your shed. You might have blueprints for your main house. You might have, a blueprint for something else. In your code base, you might have a blueprint just for your security, standards, right? You might have a blueprint just for, I don't know, here's the way we do linter config, right? And you might compose a bunch of these things together. And in that way, propagate standards across your whole code base, across your whole company. And this gets into some of the governance checks and things like that we can do. They're really, really interesting. So back to your original question about how we use this internally, right? I'm not allowed to say too much, but I will say that if I was a team, and I'm going to envision a team using custom blueprints, and I was a team that maybe uses TypeScript and has a TypeScript monorepo, right, with a whole bunch of lambdas in it, maybe some CDK stacks in it, and I don't know, maybe some release workflows, right? I would probably run my organization or my code bases with just a few blueprints, right? Probably two or three. Maybe I would have a blueprint that is responsible for a Lambda. Maybe I'd have a blueprint that is responsible for a CDK stack. Maybe I'd have a blueprint that's responsible for some release workflow and some security
So what
checks.
you're saying is keep the blueprints small? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, exactly. Keep them small and composable. So what we would do is add a Lambda blueprint to a code base, right? So for those of you who are not familiar, you can take an existing code base and just add a blueprint directly on top of that. So we would add a Lambda blueprint to a code base that would generate a pull request into that code base with this Lambda, right? And then I can actually do that multiple times, right? Like maybe my code base has 6 Lambdas or something, right? One for each endpoint. So I was like, okay, cool. Now I have 6 of the same Lambda blueprint in the same repository, all defining the various Lambdas. Then maybe I would add 1 or 2 CDK stacks, right? And then maybe I would add a release workflow, right? And each one of these would generate a pull request, right? Maybe they would have merge conflicts, maybe not, right? But if they have merge conflicts, that's fine. I just resolve them. Blueprints are smart enough to do 3-way merge by default, which is what Git uses. So if I resolve a merge conflict, right, on subsequent updates, it'll just remember those, which is really handy. So as time goes by and I'm like, oh, hey, I want to deploy my stuff to another region, I'll update my base CDK, I don't know, stack blueprint to support another region. And boom, now every single code base gets it. I merge that in. Now all my infrastructure is code, right? All my infrastructure on AWS is updated, right, with the new region. I say, oh, hey, there's a new way that we want to do snapshot testing or something like that, right? Well, I add that to the Lambda because it's literally easier to do it in the blueprint than doing it in every single Lambda, right? And then I do it in the blueprint, and then every single Lambda gets an update, right? Or I want to support some other type of testing, right? And this is sort of how you sort of start to scale your code base. I want to do an upgrade from node 14 to node 18. Well, I update that in the base blueprint, right? I verify that it generates a node 18 lambda in whichever way I'd like it to be, right? And then that auto propagates. It's a very, very powerful feature once you start thinking about your standards in inside the template that generates it, right? And before that wasn't possible because you don't have this regeneration. You don't have the lifecycle management.
Still, it sounds like today you will need to have a lot of clicking and merging stuff like that, doing manually, right? So I personally would hope that some automation will come into kind of bringing across multiple updates to blueprints in the future.
Yeah, totally. I think there's an interesting discussion to be had there specifically. Um, there's a lot of power and consequently a lot of danger that happens right when you're modifying the code itself at scale, right? And for some cases, I think this makes a lot of sense. For example, if you're doing things like your security team and you want to enforce specific practices or you want to run some sort of audit. But I think on the flip side, it's also easy to very, very quickly propagate a whole bunch of changes to a whole bunch of code bases. Um, and then say, "Oh crap, I just broke everyone," which is also maybe okay, right? Like we want to give people the power to do that. The good news is you can always walk back, right? Because blueprints are versioned and because they're code generators. If you upgrade to version 2 and you're like, actually, there was a bug there, you either have the option of pushing version 3 and forcing everyone onto that upgrade, or just forcing everyone back to version 1. Um, it's a it's a really interesting thing you can start doing when you can regenerate the code base itself or even portions of the code base.
Yeah, cool, thanks. And what was the first blueprint that you personally ever wrote? Do you remember?
So we have a series of internal blueprints. You'll see them. They're actually all going to be open source shortly. I know I've been saying that for a minute here, but we're working on it. I promise. So we have some pretty interesting internal blueprints. One of the first ones was actually called Blueprint for Blueprint. I think now it's called Blueprint Builder. It was kind of a confusing name. It's a blueprint that actually builds more blueprints. So blueprints themselves are code bases, right? They're little TypeScript projects.
Why TypeScript?
And so we chose TypeScript for no good reason other than there's the community is fairly mature. I happen to have a personal love of TypeScript. I used to build the TypeScript SDK for AWS. That was actually my first job at AWS here. TypeScript or AWS SDK v3. It's me. Yeah, quick shout out there. But we chose TypeScript because a lot of the tooling is already in TypeScript, and a lot of the key principals who sort of originally supported this, like for example, some from the CDK and things like that. Progen is like natively in TypeScript. The CDK is natively in TypeScript. That being said, blueprints are not particularly they don't have to generate TypeScript, right? They can generate Java if you'd like, and you can also build blueprints in just about any language, as long as you adhere to the. You just need to have the driver file. So I think we have maybe some internal developer. Yeah, I think it was an internal developer actually. He built a blueprint in Rust, believe it or not.
Yeah, it was going to
So that
be
is
my
technically
next comment, right? So if there is anyone that would like to see blueprints in another language, please let either Alex or maybe also myself know, and I can forward that to the team, right? I personally am happy with TypeScript today, right? I don't think that you need many other possibilities, but I can see maybe people that are working in Rust a lot asking for it as well. Okay.
Yep.
So next,
we are actually, fun fact, JSII compliant. So if you wanted to generate blueprints in another JSII language, such as I don't know what, Python or something, you could do that.
that
That
means
out of the
that
box.
means that I could write Java and generate TypeScript using JSII out of it, is what you're saying. Um, that
Correct.
sounds like an interesting thing for a lot of enterprises as well. All right, so maybe it would need some model generation because I think that's not there today, right? But it sounds like a fun thing. And next thing is, what was the last blueprint that you wrote?
The last blueprint that I wrote is not actually released just yet, but I'm not allowed to talk about this just yet.
Okay.
The last blueprint that I wrote that is publicly released. So for just your vision, I guess here, I don't have subject matter expertise in most things. So blueprints are developed internally by a wide variety of different teams. My team, the blueprints team, owns a very small set of blueprints. So we own, I think it's the blueprint builder, which is the blueprint used to build more blueprints. We own a really cool, not released just
Mhm.
yet blueprint that I can't quite talk about. We own a tester blueprint. And I think the last one that I wrote that is publicly available is the SAM serverless blueprint. Um, but we also publish a series of internal blueprints that we use for ourselves for building our own code base, things like that, that we hope to share with you shortly
Cool.
as well.
And now, if you would ask the community to build a blueprint that you think would really help, okay, do you have like a use case in mind that someone should be building and sharing with the community and making it available?
Yeah, I think we're in the phase of this sort of project where we're trying to figure out exactly how people sort of interact with the system and sort of the learnings that they get. Um, I think there's been a few really interesting observations that I've had. Um, I didn't expect people to sort of quite immediately go for like quite advanced use cases, like keeping blueprints small and composing them. But that's sort of what's happened. So that's been pretty interesting. Um, in hindsight, what I had expected people to do is take something like Yeoman, right, or some of these other places that they have their best practices like Jinja templates, whatever, right? Convert those into blueprints and like just update the blueprint and get a full new project in much the same way Yeoman would. Um, it hasn't happened, and I've been actually like quite surprised and like happy as well, right? Because you can compose blueprints together, right? You can sort of devolve the ownership of particular parts of your code base to different teams. Um, so I'd be really curious to see from the community how people want to approach things like security scanning or doing things like, hey, I want a blueprint that scans for log4j or something like that, and then fixes it. Um, I'm not quite sure where that falls in just yet. I've got some of my own ideas, but I don't want to, poison, other people just yet.
Cool. Thank you so much. And last one for this for today. If I create a project in CodeCatalyst, are there blueprints involved automatically if I
Today,
start from a blank project today?
today, no. Blueprints are a level above a particular project. So you can start with a blank project. You can add some existing code, right? Like maybe you can add I don't know, just push in your Spring Boot application that's been around for 10 years, right? You put that into CodeCatalyst. What you can then do, and at this point, blueprints are not involved at all. At this point, what you could do is you could maybe graft a blueprint that defines the best practices for a new Spring Boot application directly onto your existing project, right? You might get one gnarly pull request, right? But once you resolve that, then your code base is up to date forever, and that's really some of the power here, and why we think this is pretty special. But no, blueprints are not particularly tightly coupled to CodeCatalyst. They are sort of need CodeCatalyst in order to function because blueprints work over the scope of multiple repositories. When you're building code, it's really not just the stuff that's inside your source repository that you care about. You care about things like which accounts are you connecting these things to, like where are you deploying them, right? Like maybe issue boards, maybe various secrets that your code base depends on, things like that. And blueprints allow you to generate all of those. That was another one of those key decisions that we made early on, where we wanted to keep this a level above the actual code base, even though the majority of the things you're interacting with is the actual code base.
Yeah, and that brings blueprints to be kind of configuration as code for CodeCatalyst as well, especially for your projects. Now, since CodeCatalyst has been launched, there have been people asking about infrastructure as code / configuration as code for CodeCatalyst, and I could potentially see blueprints kind of taking more of that responsibility around also setting up spaces and stuff like that, right?
Correct.
But let's not speculate. Let's see what you have in mind for the next weeks, month, years for the community. And I would like to end this session for today. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with me today. And looking forward to have you pretty soon back on to talk a little bit about how do you interact with blueprints CLI, maybe ask you for some tips and tricks. And yeah, looking forward to see you back. Thank you so much, Alex. Okay. Great work. Keep it up. Bye-bye.
Thank you.